400 horsepower, 6-speed manual, estate car, oh, and it's Japanese. What could it possibly be? Right, so of course it is our Mitsubishi Lancer Evo IX Wagon. And this car is a car that we bought nearly 3 years ago now, and it's a car that we've really struggled to sell personally because we've absolutely fallen in love with it. We haven't used it anywhere near as much as we should have done, but as this summer comes in, I think we're going to take it to some more shows, possibly Jap Fest with Tom the detailer, and use it really for its intended purposes, which is ultimately just to be enjoyed. This is the car that we've always wanted as a team. We got it. We got an exceptional example, especially mechanically, and now we've got it. We just haven't really used it like I say, like we wanted to. So this is going to be the year 2025 where DT Performance get out this absolutely wonderful car, and isn't it fun? Oh, she's brilliant. She is brilliant. Okay, so some facts and figures, some information about the Evo, or the Evo brand. Most people are going to be au fait with the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo. It's from that era of the early 90s where the likes of Colin McRae and his cronies were having manufacturers going out there to create these fast saloons and estate cars as such, but in the rallying, the saloons, we had the Subaru Impreza WRX STI, and we had the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo. And I think really you were always in one camp or the other. And to be truthful, when I was a kid, the Colin McRae thing was the one. It was the Impreza STIs, it was the noise, it was the iconic looks, it was the 555 stickers down the side of the cars. That was what I wanted. But actually, when I was old enough to be able to drive these, it was the Evo that I had an awful more of a connection with, and ended up owning one myself. So as I say, facts and figures. So the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo became a thing with the Evo I, which obviously because the Evo back then, in October 1992, and it became a big hit fairly quickly, but its tweaks and things over the years has really made it the car that most people love and associate with the Evo brand. So the Evo 1 became the 2, the 3, the 4, and so on. You get the idea. When it came to the 5, that was probably the start of the cars that most people really aspired to own. They really looked very aggressive. They were a little bit more prevalent in the rallying, so they were a bit more iconic. So the 5 became the car that everybody started to want until the 6 came out, and the 6 really looked very similar to the 5, but had a wide arch kit on it. It had some over fenders that connected to the bumper on the front and rear wings. 7, 8s and 9s all derived from the same style until we end with a 10, but I didn't really like the 10, and probably speaking unfairly for a lot of people that have a massive amount of respect for the 10 and really like them. It, for me, wasn't really an Evo. They didn't really do it for me style wise. The interior lost some of its, I don't know, and the engines had changed by that point as well. You know, the 4G engines that were in these, they had changed to a Myvec setup in the 10s, and whilst I've never owned one, I don't believe they're quite as good. I'm sure people in the comments will tell me if they were or what the pitfalls were, but they always look more plasticky, you know. There's no substitution for me of opening a bonnet on a car, seeing a turbo, seeing an intake, seeing a manifold. But on the Myvec 10s, there was just a big plastic, unsexy cover, and it didn't make any sense to me. It sounds probably very stupid, and I know that modern cars ultimately are more plasticky now, but for me it just didn't do it. It just didn't do it for me. And so many people ended up going for the SST cars, which were the automatic, the double clutch transmission. I don't know that we'll all like a double clutch transmission car and stuff like that, but for me, an Evo, an Impreza, it's got to be manual. You've got to grab it by the scruff of the neck. You know, this one revs to 7,750 RPM with a great big turbocharger on it. That's unbelievable. And don't forget, this is a car from 2005. That's 20 years old now, and it's a 2 litre with 400 horsepower. And again, I know that we all expect that nowadays. You know, you've got an A45S that's a mass production vehicle. I get it, with a 12.5, 15,000 mile service interval. But, you know, when the guys that came out with these in the very early 2000s, as a mass production car, yes, you had to service them more often. Yes, they were probably a little bit more delicate and things like that. But that was not an easy feat, and it's certainly not anything to be sniffed at. Okay, like I say, some facts and figures. So, for people that aren't au fait with the Japanese and how they used to do things in the 90s and early noughties, there was always a gentleman's agreement in Japan that all the manufacturers of their super saloons, hot hatches, you know, Nissan GTRs, all those kind of things, they could never be above 276 or so horsepower. That was that gentleman's agreement. It was an official, unofficial thing. And it was really to stop competitions between the brands pushing the boundaries all the way up to the dizzy heights of 300, 400, 500 horsepower, where things would just have got out of hand. Now, I don't believe for a second that all these cars conform to that. I just don't. You know, I won't have it, you know. But I understand that I had a 1991 R32 GTR, and I know what they used to do to keep the power down was they used to put boost restrictors in and things like that. And again, I have absolutely no doubt that that was a thing that was effective. But a lot of these cars do feel a lot more horsepower. So 276 horsepower, as I say, in all the cars, and up until the 7s, 8s and 9s you had a GSR. They conform within these power bands. But in the UK we had FQ and FQ and MR models, and you had an FQ 300, a 320, a 340, 360. You had HKS 360s. You had an FQ 400, which was the creme de la creme car with a great big turbo with more lag and goodness knows what. So they didn't have to conform, especially if they were coming to the UK and they were UK approved. And more recently, they've actually scrapped this gentleman's agreement. It's not a thing anymore, obviously, because there's so many cars being produced that are way above that, the likes of the Nissan GTRs and so on and so forth. As I say, you know, very close ratio gearbox, 0 to 60 times. You know, they were hovering around the late 4s, early 5s, 0 to 60. And top speed, God knows, it's not what you do this. I think they were electronically limited to 155 miles an hour. But again, I'm sure that someone will correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. It's not really what these are about. I've never thought to take one to a top speed at all. So this car, what is it all about? So as I say, it's an Evo 9. So it's the last of the nice ones, as I feel. This particular car is an import. They did not bring the wagons to the UK. They didn't. 2,500 units were produced total. Again, give or take a few numbers here and there, but that's what was quoted. And the majority, or you know, significantly over 50% of the cars were the SST setups, the automatics. That wouldn't be for me. I don't think it'd suit this car. Again, I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of people that absolutely love them, but it's not for me. And certainly most of the cars that have been brought to the UK are those SST models. So this is a very, very rare car. I have no idea of how many are in the UK as a wagon, as a manual. I've tried to go on the website that says how many left. have a look if you've never been on that site before. If you've got a rare car or you want to see a rare car, howmanyleft.co.uk, you can go on there and it will tell you how many are taxed, how many are sawned, and you can see the algorithm of how many cars have gone through the cycle of being owned and ultimately left to rot or scrapped. So this car, as I say, we bought it being the one that we wanted, the manual, the wagon, the 9, and this one was sitting in central London. Central London of all places, and it is a ULEZ approved car, so you don't pay a ULEZ charge every day, which is ridiculous really, but Sadiq Khan is an interesting character. Anyway, so the car, this particular one, it has small modifications that are just making it a bit better than a factory car, OEM plus, fine tuning, the ballerina point shoe. This one's 400 horsepower, just over, and to get it to that level, it's got a very, very good map. It's got an intake, a catback exhaust, and that's about it. So they're very tunable. And this isn't a really laggy FQ400 with a great big turbo where you're just getting all your peak power when the boost comes in. This one's a very, very revvy. So this is right at the limit of the injectors and the turbo setup that come with the 9s. But it makes it a really, really revvy car. And it is extremely quick. You know, 400 horsepower, as I say, is not to be sniffed at, but it is a common sight on the roads in the UK now, in lots of cars, loads of cars. You can go and buy, you know, a hybrid Range Rover with 400 horsepower, but it won't be exciting. So it is a very throwaway number nowadays. Very, very throwaway number nowadays. So going back to when we bought this car 2.5, 3 years ago from a gentleman in central London, he was the guy that imported it through DCY Europe, very well renowned company for importing specialist vehicles, and he bought the car back in 2016, so it's been here nearly 10 years now. Now what we liked about this car was that the history was second to none, both in Japan and over here. All the money had been spent in the right places, both proactive, reactive and routine maintenance, and some of the choice mods as well. What made this car so interesting to us was that whilst it had all those things done, because it was a central London car and the guy daily drove this, he daily drove it, it was in a sorry state outside. Nothing that couldn't be turned around, nothing that couldn't be worked on, but it really didn't, well, it looked awful, it really did. And that was throughout the car. You know, it had obviously different colour wheels to what it's got on now. The brake calipers were pink, there was nothing left of them. The underside was very solid, very, very good. It had been looked after, never undersealed or wax oiled, but it was just absolutely mint. So from what he told us, and we do believe him, if it went out in the rain or in the cold or whatever, it was always cleaned and jetted down properly. And I can believe it because it is so original. And we're borderline whether we want to protect that, to be truthful, because originality, it's only there once, and if you put something on it, you're covering it up. It's hard, but things need to be protected for future generations and for the sake of the car's future. So yeah, so what we did when we got the car in is we wanted to give it some love, bring it back from the depths and reinvigorate the cool looks and the sexiness of that early 2000s, mid 2000s Japanese styling. So we had all the wheels stripped off the car, which were dipped, stripped and painted, actually in a Subaru Impreza wheel colour, but it suits it. We had the calipers repainted and lacquered by Tom in-house at DT. We had the front end painted because it was unfortunately very chippy and battle scarred on some of the lowers by Bowen's Bodyworks. Good friend Dave Bowen. That was done to an excellent standard. And then the remainder of the car The arches, the suspension, all those things were steam cleaned very, very well and protected. And the rest of the car, the bodywork was wet sanded quite heavily. More heavily so than we would like to normally go on a Japanese car. And the result is not perfect. It's not perfect, but it's as close as you could reasonably expect for originality across the majority of the car and for it to look so good. There's a couple of chips on either door, this driver's side front, the passenger side rear. There's a couple of odd scratches, but that all adds to its character. I always say to people, by the time you were 10, by the time you were 15, by the time you were 20, you'd fell over, you'd bumped your knee, you'd grazed your knee, you'd grazed your arm, you'd broke a bone, you'd stubbed a toe, you'd go, all these things. It's part of you, it's part of the car, it's part of its history, and it's part of how it got here to 124,000, showing on the clock today as a combination of miles and kilometres. What is it about this particular car? Well, as I say, a manual 400 horsepower estate car that's very light, that's four-wheel drive, that's fun, that's cool, that's different, that's classic. What else is there? Well, I can't think of anything. I've said it before. Oh, I can't think of it. I can't think of anything. I really can't. Not that's going to do this for me. In the earlier Imprezas, there was an Impreza wagon that they did in the WRXs, and they're cool. I played with those in Gran Turismo, and I'd be very tempted to have one at some point. But it's very old now, and this at least is semi-modern. It's got air conditioning. This one's got navigation, touchscreen, DAB. It's got some carbon fibre effect. Don't know if it's real or not. You've got semi-modern Recaro seats. They're comfortable. They hold you in the right places. They're not particularly adjustable. Do they need to be? No. You've got multi-airbags in the car, but you've still got all the heritage there. I absolutely love this car. And it's been up for £29,950, which I think is an absolute bargain for what this car represents both now and in the future. There isn't really anything else close that I can imagine putting £30,000 into that's going to be able to carry 2 dogs, 4 suitcases and God knows what, and be able to pull out of a junction to the point that if you give it some stick like this, I'm breaking every single speed limit in the UK by now. That's ridiculous, and it's so wet today. And it sounds like that. It's popping and banging. It's got the induction, it's got the blow-off valve recirculation. You've got some turbo chatter. Oh, it's old school cool. I could easily drive this every day. So I guess this really for me is the perfect package for a fast estate car from the mid-2000s with £30,000. Is that something that most people want? Probably not. Probably not something that most people are looking for. But my God, if you are, this is the one for you. Right, so as I said in the video, is there a common market for a 400 horsepower manual Japanese estate car? No, it's probably a very small market. But for the people that really do have a lot of love for this generation of late 90s, mid 2000s Japanese sports car, the Imprezas, the Evos, but perhaps you've got a couple of kids, you might want it to be a little bit more practical when you go away, weekends, on holiday, special occasions. Again, it's a car that you're not going to lose any money on, isn't it? £30,000, it's a future classic, it's a current classic, it's iconic, it's very fun. I don't think you can go very far wrong with stuff like this. And the values, if anything, are actually creeping up all the time on anything rare and Japanese. So, absolute huge win for me on this. And this particular example, as I said in the video, is phenomenal. Check it out.